I want you to picture a scenario for a second. You're standing in a living room. It's a Saturday afternoon. The sunlight is streaming through these massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The floors are this warm, honey-colored oak. It just gleams. There is a smell of fresh cookies because, of course, the real estate agent baked them 20 minutes ago. You are looking at the crown molding. You're mentally placing your sofa against the far wall, and you are thinking, this is it. This is the one.
That is the honeymoon phase of the transaction. And honestly, it is probably the most dangerous moment in your entire financial life.
It really is. Because while I'm looking at the way the light hits the floor, I'm not looking at the water stain on the ceiling that's been painted over 3 times.
Right.
I'm not thinking about the fact that the furnace in the basement is literally rusting from the inside out. I am operating entirely on vibes.
Which is a terrifying paradox when you think about it. We live in the information age. If you were going to buy a new laptop, a purchase of maybe, what, $1,000?
Yeah, maybe $1,500 if you're getting a good one.
You would spend weeks researching. You'd watch unboxing videos. You'd read the technical specs. You'd compare processor speeds. You would know everything about that machine before you swiped your card.
Oh, absolutely. I'll read 300 reviews for a toaster. A $50 toaster.
Exactly. But when it comes to the single most expensive purchase of a lifetime, buying a home, signing away 30 years of future earnings, most people rely on a visual walkthrough that lasts maybe 20 minutes.
If that.
They rely on the aesthetic appeal, and that gap between aesthetic appeal and structural reality is where financial ruin hides.
And the only thing standing between you and that potential money pit is this one kind of administrative-sounding document, the home inspection.
Yeah.
Now, looking at the stack of research you sent over for today's deep dive, I have to admit, I always thought of home inspection as a bit of a formality, like getting your car inspected for emissions. It's just a sticker you need to get the keys.
That's what most people think.
But the more I read, the more I realized this isn't just a checklist. It is a full-blown forensic investigation.
That is the perfect way to frame it. It is building forensics. It is a crime scene investigation, but the victim is your future bank account.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
And the mission of today's deep dive is to shatter that checklist mentality.
We are going to tear this industry apart. We aren't just talking about checking if the toilet's flush or the lights turn on. We are diving into the legal landscape, which is shocking.
It's a mess in places.
We're going to talk about the massive difference between condition and value and how this industry is a regulatory Wild West in some places and a bureaucratic maze in others.
And we're going to travel the globe too, because how we inspect a home changes entirely depending on where you are. We'll look at the wooden frames of California, the damp brick of the UK, and the concrete high-rises of Mumbai.
And, perhaps most surprisingly, we're going to talk about the things an inspector is legally forbidden from telling you. That part blew my mind.
Yeah, the liability aspect is huge.
So let's unpack this. We are working from a comprehensive overview of inspection standards across North America, the UK, and India. Let's start with the core identity. What actually is a home inspection? Because I think a lot of us have a misconception here.
The best place to start is the definition itself, which usually appears in the standards of practice for any major association. A home inspection is defined as a limited, non-invasive examination of the condition of a home.
Limited and non-invasive.
Yeah.
Okay, that already sounds like legal speak for I'm not breaking anything.
Precisely. And this is the first point of friction for many buyers. They watch home renovation shows where the contractor takes a sledgehammer to a wall and says, oh, look, dry rot.
Right. Let's just open this up and see what's behind here.
A home inspector cannot do that. They cannot tear down drywall to check the wiring behind it. They cannot peel up the carpet to check the subfloor. They cannot dig up the foundation to check the footings.
So they are handcuffed, in a way. They have to assess the health of the patient without doing surgery.
That's a great analogy. It's a physical exam, not an autopsy. It's about what is visible and accessible on the day of the inspection.
Okay, accessible is a key word there.
A huge one. If the seller has stacked boxes wall to wall in the basement, blocking a foundation wall, the inspector can't see that wall. They'll note in the report, view obstructed, and that's it.
So if there's a giant crack behind those boxes, that's on you, the buyer, if you don't ask the seller to move them.
It's on you. And there is another key nuance here that listeners need to really internalize. It is a snapshot. The inspector is describing the condition of the home at the specific time of the inspection.
So let's play that out. If the inspector comes on a Tuesday and the furnace is working fine. He turns it on, it heats up, it shuts off, everything's good.
Yep, he'll write in the report, furnace was functional at time of inspection.
Then I buy the house on Friday, and on Saturday, the furnace blows up. Is that the inspector's fault?
Almost certainly not, and that is a hard pill for buyers to swallow. But inspectors do not guarantee future efficiency, and they certainly don't guarantee life expectancy.
They're not giving you a warranty.
They're reporting on what is visible right now. They aren't prophets, they are observers. A component can be working perfectly on Tuesday and suffer a catastrophic mechanical failure on Saturday. The circuit board on that furnace could have been on its last legs, but it worked for the 10 minutes he tested it.
It's about managing expectations. You aren't buying a warranty, you're buying a report on the current state of affairs.
Correct. And this brings us to what I call the triangulation of professionals, which is where I see the most confusion. You have a team of people involved in a house sale. You've got the real estate agent, the appraiser, and the inspector. In the movies, they all seem to walk through the house together, having a chat.
Right. But in reality, they have completely different motivations.
Right.
And different clients, really.
Totally different clients. And different jobs. Let's break that down.
I feel like people confuse the appraiser and the inspector the most. I've definitely heard friends say, oh, the bank is sending their appraiser out, so they'll tell me if the roof is bad.
That is a dangerous assumption. Let's distinguish them. An appraiser determines value. Their client is usually the bank, the lender.
So they work for the money people.
Yes. Their job is to answer one question for the lender. Is this pile of bricks and wood worth the $500,000 you are about to lend on it?
So the appraiser is there to protect the bank's investment. They want to make sure they aren't lending $500,000 on a shack that's worth $10.
Exactly. They're looking at comparables. What did the neighbor's house sell for? They're looking at square footage, lot size, bedroom count. It's an economic analysis.
What if the roof is bad?
Well, if the roof is caved in, will they notice? Yes, of course, because that affects the market value today.
Right.
But if the roof has a slow leak into the attic insulation that isn't visible from the driveway, if it has maybe 5 years of life left instead of 20, the appraiser likely won't see it. And honestly, they might not care as long as the market value holds up against the comps.
Okay, so the appraiser is the economist. They're looking at the numbers, the spreadsheets.
Right. The inspector, on the other hand, determines condition. They are the diagnostician. Their client is you, the buyer. They are there to tell you what is broken, what is unsafe, and what is nearing the end of its life. An appraiser says, this house is worth $500,000. An inspector says, this house needs $50,000 of work because the plumbing is shot and the electrical panel is a fire hazard.
A huge difference. One is about the market, the other is about the mechanics.
Exactly. And then there's a third category that confuses people, particularly in the United States, the building inspector.
Yes. This one always trips me up. I'm waiting on the building inspector. That sounds official. It sounds like the most important one.
It is official, but it's a different lane entirely. If you hear building inspector, that usually refers to a government or municipal employee. Their job is code compliance.
Code compliance. So that's the person who comes by when you're building a deck to make sure you aren't violating city laws.
Yes. They are checking against a very specific book, the building code for your town, for that year. Did you use the right number of nails? Is the railing 42 inches high? Is the staircase too narrow?
So does a private home inspector check for code?
Generally, no. And this is a critical distinction. A private home inspection is not a code compliance check.
Why not? If something is against code, isn't it by definition a problem?
It is a problem, but codes change constantly. A house built in 1950 was built to the 1950 code. It would fail 1,000 points of the 2024 code.
Ah, okay.
An inspector isn't there to tell you everything that's not up to modern standards. They're there to tell you if it's functional and safe.
But wait, if my stairs are unsafe, won't they tell me?
They will tell you it's a safety hazard. They might say, these stairs are steep and the tread is shallow, which is a fall risk, but they won't cite you for violating, Municipal Code Section 12B. They aren't the police. They are consultants.
So we have the economist, the appraiser, we have the police, the municipal inspector,
Right.
And then we have the consultant or the private investigator, which is the home inspector. That helps clear the board.
It does. And the consultant's goal, the private inspector, is building diagnostics. I love that term. It's about identifying problems. But here's the catch. They identify the problem, but they don't always identify the solution.
Walk me through that. If they find a problem, shouldn't they tell me how to fix it and how much it'll cost?
That's what every buyer wants, right? a neat little list of problems with a price tag next to each one.
Yes.
But they can't. In fact, they're often discouraged from doing so because they aren't specialists in every trade and they aren't contractors. An inspector might say, there is elevated moisture reading in the basement wall. That is the diagnosis.
Okay.
But is that moisture coming from a crack in the foundation? Is it coming from a high water table? Is it coming from a broken gutter outside that's dumping water right next to the house?
And the fix for each of those is totally different.
Wildly different. And does it require a $200 patch or a $20,000 French drain system? The inspector often stops at the, what, there is moisture? They then refer you to a specialist for the how and how much. A foundation specialist, a plumber, a landscaper.
So the inspector is the general practitioner. They listen to your chest and say, your heart sounds weird, but they don't perform the surgery. They send you to the cardiologist.
That is a perfect analogy. The inspector is the GP. They know a little bit about everything: plumbing, electrical, structural, roofing, HVAC. But they aren't the master electrician or the structural engineer. Their job is to triage the house and tell you which specialist you need to call.
Which makes sense. You can't be an expert in everything.
Oh, yeah.
But that leads to the question, who are these people? If they have to know a little bit about everything, they must have some serious training, right? This can't just be a job you decide to do one day.
You would hope so. You would absolutely hope so.
That tone suggests otherwise.
Well, let's talk about the regulatory landscape in North America. This section of the research was fascinating because I think most people assume that to be a home inspector, you need a license, you need a badge, you need to pass a board exam.
Right. My hairstylist needs a license. My driver needs a license. Surely the person telling me if my house is going to collapse needs a license.
In the U.S. and Canada, it is a bit of a regulatory patchwork. We often call it the licensing Wild West.
How wild are we talking? Are we talking like tumbleweeds and shootouts at high noon?
Pretty close. So currently, more than 30 U.S. states regulate the industry. That's the good news.
Okay.
That means in those states, places like Texas, New York, Illinois, you need to pass exams, take strictly regulated training courses, carry insurance, and do continuing education every year to keep your license.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. That covers a lot of the population. But that leaves almost 20 states.
It leaves a significant number of states where the profession is completely unregulated.
Yeah.
States like California, Colorado, Georgia, big states.
Wait, California has no state license for home inspectors. The place with earthquakes and wildfires.
No statewide license. Now, there are professional associations that inspectors can join, which have their own standards, but the state government does not license them.
Define completely unregulated for me in one of those states.
I mean that in those states, you could literally wake up tomorrow, decide you are tired of podcasting, go to a print shop, print a business card that says host speaker, home inspector, buy a flashlight at the hardware store, and go inspect someone's $500,000 asset.
Without any training. Without proving I know the difference between a neutral wire and a hot wire.
Theoretically, yes. In unregulated states, there is no state board checking your credentials. Now, the market might filter you out eventually if you're terrible, or you might get sued into oblivion.
Right, eventually.
But there is no government barrier to entry.
That is absolutely terrifying. It's like having a driver's license requirement in one state, but crossing the border and being allowed to drive a semi-truck with zero training just because you own a truck.
It puts a massive burden on the consumer. If you are buying a home in an unregulated state, you cannot just assume the inspector is qualified because they have a website and a clipboard.
So what do you do? How do you vet them?
You have to ask. Are you a member of a national association? Are you certified by ASHI or InterNACHI? Those are the two big ones in the U.S. You ask to see a sample report. You ask how long they've been doing it. You have to become the regulator yourself, in a way.
It really emphasizes that caveat emptor, buyer beware. But even if you have a qualified inspector, the whole process is high stress. The inspection is usually contingency, right? Can you explain what that means?
Yes, the valid contract contingency. In most real estate contracts, the deal isn't firm until the inspection contingency is waived or satisfied.
So the inspector is basically the gatekeeper. The deal can't close until they say it's okay, or rather until the buyer reads the report and says it's okay.
Exactly. The buyer typically has a window, say 7 to 10 days, to conduct the inspection. After they get the report, they can do one of three things. 1, they can accept the house as is and waive the contingency. 2, they can try to negotiate with the seller for repairs or a price reduction based on the findings.
Or 3.
Or 3, if the problems are too big or the seller won't negotiate, they can walk away from the deal and get their deposit back. The contingency is their escape hatch.
And that power, the power to kill the deal, creates a massive amount of tension.
A huge amount. Think about the players again. The seller wants to move. The buyer wants the house. And the real estate agent, well, they want the commission.
And they don't get paid if the deal falls apart.
Correct. So imagine you are a real estate agent. You have a client buying a house. You need an inspector. Are you going to recommend the inspector who is known as the deal killer?
No.
The guy who spends 5 hours at the house, finds every single loose screw, and writes a 100-page report that scares the first-time buyer away from a perfectly good house with minor issues?
Probably not. You want the inspector who is reasonable, who doesn't make a big fuss, who can, manage the client's expectations.
Yeah, precisely. And that creates a massive conflict of interest. If inspectors rely on agents for referrals, they have a financial incentive to go easy on the house, to minimize the problem so the deal closes and the agent keeps sending them work.
It's the fox guarding the henhouse. Or rather, the fox inviting his friend, the wolf, to come check on the chickens.
And this isn't just a theoretical worry. It became such a problem that it actually shaped legislation. We have to talk about the Massachusetts case study.
Yes, May 2001. I remember reading this in the notes. This is a huge deal. Massachusetts becomes the first state to basically say enough is enough.
They recognized that the referral loop was anti-consumer. They saw that agents, specifically listing agents who represent the seller, had a vested interest in a favorable report.
What did they do?
They amended their real estate licensing law. Listing agents in Massachusetts are now prohibited by law from directly referring a specific home inspector to a buyer.
So even if I beg my agent, please just tell me who to hire. I don't know anyone. They can't give me a name.
They cannot say, call Bob. Bob is great. They cannot even give you a short list of their top 3 favorites.
Wow. So what do? How does a buyer find anyone?
They have to hand you the complete list of all licensed inspectors in the state. Or they have to direct you to the state's official website where that registry is published.
Yeah, that is hardcore. It's basically, here is the phone book. Good luck.
It feels like it puts the buyer in a tough spot, but I see the logic.
It forces the buyer to do their own due diligence, to make their own calls, read their own reviews. It breaks the link between the agent's commission and the inspector's paycheck.
I can see how that would be annoying for an agent who legitimately knows a great, thorough inspector, but I also see how it protects the buyer from a soft inspection.
It's a blunt instrument, but effective.
Ah.
But regulation isn't just about consumer protection in a financial sense. Sometimes it's about life and death. You mentioned a California law earlier, Senate Bill 721.
Yes, the balcony bill. This feels like a shift from transactional inspection to maintenance inspection. That is the perfect distinction. Most inspections happen when a house is sold. It's a one-time event tied to a transaction. But SB 721, passed in September 2018, targets something specific: exterior elevated elements.
Exterior elevated elements. That sounds fancy. We're talking about decks and balconies.
Decks, balconies, walkways, stairways, anything wood-framed that is sticking out of a multifamily building and is more than 6 feet off the ground.
And there's a tragic context to this, right?
Yeah.
I seem to remember a balcony collapse in Berkeley.
Exactly. The 2015 Berkeley balcony collapse. 6 students died. Several more were horribly injured. It was horrific. And the cause was dry rot.
So the wood just failed.
The wood had rotted from the inside out because of poor waterproofing during construction, but it looked fine from the outside until the moment it snapped.
God, that is a nightmare. You're just at a party and the floor disappears.
So SB 721 mandates that buildings with these structures must undergo inspections by licensed professionals, often structural engineers, every 9 years for condos, and a similar law, AB 721, requires it every 6 years for apartment buildings.
And this isn't about selling the building. This is just an ongoing SASE check.
Correct. It acknowledges that buildings are organic in a way. Wood rots, fasteners rust. You can't just build it and forget it. You have to maintain it. And if the owners don't comply, they face penalties.
It shifts the mindset from market value to structural integrity as an ongoing responsibility.
It does. It's a huge step.
Let's look north now, because if the U.S. is a patchwork of strict laws like Massachusetts and unregulated wild zones like California, Canada sounds like, Well, a bit of a polite brawl.
Polite brawl is a very diplomatic way to put it. Canada historically followed the U.S. model unregulated in many places, with voluntary associations trying to set standards. But they made a significant deviation in 2016.
What happened in 2016?
The development of the CSA A770-16 standard.
That is a very catchy name.
It rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? But it's important. It was a unifying standard developed by the Canadian Standards Association. The goal was to bring everyone onto the same page, a single, rigorous standard for what a home inspection should be across the entire country.
And was that successful? Is everyone singing Kumbaya now?
Not exactly. The standard is there, but adoption and regulation are provincial matters. And implementation is where it gets messy, especially in Ontario.
Ontario is the biggest market.
By far. Estimated 1,500 inspectors back in 2013, probably more now, and the situation there is complicated. The source material mentioned a battle of the associations.
Yes, I saw that.
It really is. You have the OAHI, the Ontario Association of Home Inspectors, and then you have the Ontario ACHI, the Ontario Association of Certified Home Inspectors.
Okay, those names are way too similar. That is designed to be confusing for the consumer.
It's like the People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front, and they both claim to be the largest or the most authoritative, but the real fight is over a title, RHI or Registered Home Inspector.
It sounds fancy. Who gets to use it?
Well, this is where it gets legally weird. Under a private act from 1994, the OAHI has the legal right to award that designation in Ontario. It's protected by law.
So OEHI owns the term in Ontario.
Yes. But here is the twist. The Canadian Association, CAHPI, owns the federal copyright to the term.
So one group has the provincial law, and the other group has the federal copyright. How does that even work?
Essentially, it's a mess. And amid all this infighting over acronyms and logos, the consumer is left scratching their head wondering who is actually qualified to check my roof.
Is there a solution on the horizon? Or are they just going to fight forever?
There is legislation in the works. The Home Inspection Act 2017 has received royal assent in Ontario. This would license inspectors directly through the government and dissolve that old 1994 act. It would theoretically end the association wars.
But, I sense a but.
But, as with many things in government, it is awaiting specific regulations to actually become law. It's been in this state of limbo for years. So for now, it is still a bit of a maze.
It seems like no matter where you go, figuring out who is qualified to inspect your house is half the battle.
It is. And if we hop across the pond to the United Kingdom, we see a totally different approach. We see what happens when the government tries to intervene too aggressively and, frankly, gets it wrong.
This is the Home Information Pack story, right? The HIP.
The HIP, this was a massive government initiative introduced in the mid-2000s. The idea was actually quite noble. They wanted to speed up the home buying process, which in the UK can be painfully slow.
Okay, so what was the plan?
They mandated that sellers had to provide a home condition report up front as part of this pack before the house even went on the market.
That actually makes sense to me. Why wait for a buyer to find the problems? Put all the cards on the table from day one.
In theory, yes. The government anticipated they would need 7,500 to 8,000 inspectors to churn out 2 million of these packs a year. It was pitched as a new industry, a massive jobs program.
Become a home inspector. Secure your future.
Exactly. Thousands of people paid for training. They went to courses. They got certified. They were ready to go. But there were two massive problems.
What were they?
One, the global financial market crashed in 2008, and the UK housing market went with it. Suddenly, no one was moving.
Bad timing.
And two, the public hated the HIPs. They were seen as expensive, bureaucratic red tape that the seller had to pay for, whether their house sold or not.
So what happened?
The political winds shifted. The coalition government came into power and canceled the HIPs in 2010, suspended them with immediate effect.
Ouch. So what happened to all those thousands of newly trained inspectors?
The role of home inspector, as defined by that program, became redundant overnight. Thousands of people who had retrained for this career, who had invested time and money, were left with a qualification that was essentially worthless.
That is brutal.
Yeah.
A government-created industry.
Yeah.
Wiped out by the same government. So who inspects homes in the UK now? Did they just stop inspecting?
No, it went back to the established experts. In the UK, inspections, or surveys as they're called, are done by Chartered Surveyors. These are members of the RICS, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors.
That sounds much more posh than home inspector.
It is more formalized. To become a chartered surveyor requires a degree and significant professional experience and a rigorous exam process. And the source notes that a full building survey from a chartered surveyor is generally more detailed than what we see in North America. They go deep.
Interesting. So they went from a failed bureaucratic experiment back to a highly professionalized, rigorous standard. It highlights that you cannot just manufacture an industry overnight. It needs deep roots.
Speaking of deep roots, or maybe the lack of them, let's talk about India. The source describes the home inspection industry there as being in its infancy.
This was the most fascinating part of the global comparison for me, because when I think of India, specifically cities like Mumbai or Bangalore, I think of massive construction, high-rises going up overnight, entire townships being built. You would think inspection would be huge there.
The scale of construction is staggering, but the consumer protection infrastructure is still catching up. In India, the concept of a third-party inspection is very, very new.
Why is that? Is it just that people don't know it exists?
Awareness is a big part of it, but there is also a massive cultural and power barrier. We have to look at the relationship between the buyer and the builder.
Okay, what's that dynamic like?
In the US or Canada, the buyer is usually king. There are lots of houses to choose from. In a hot Indian market, especially for new construction, the builder holds all the cards. Imagine you are buying an apartment in a high-rise. You have put down your life savings. You are one of 1,000 people trying to get a unit.
Right. It's a seller's market on steroids.
Exactly. So if you demand an inspection, if you antagonize the builder by pointing out that the walls are crooked or the finishing is poor, there is a genuine fear that the builder might just cancel your allocation.
Seriously, they can just do that.
They might say, "You are being difficult. I have 10 other people with cash who won't ask questions. Here's your deposit back. Next."
That is wild. So people are skipping the inspection out of fear of losing the deal, even on the biggest purchase of their lives.
In many cases, yes. They accept the unit as is because they are desperate to secure the asset. But that is starting to change. A new law called URI-RA, the Real Estate Regulatory Authority, has come into effect in recent years.
Okay, URI-RA, what does it do?
It is a landmark piece of legislation in India intended to clean up the real estate sector. It holds builders accountable for delays and for the quality of construction they promise.
So it gives the consumer some power back.
It gives the consumer teeth. It has given more potency to inspection companies. Now, a buyer can point to RA laws and say, "I have a right to quality." It is empowering the consumer to ask for that inspection.
And the buildings themselves are different, right? We aren't talking about checking for wood rot in a Mumbai high-rise.
Correct. Indian homes are predominantly kiln-baked brick or reinforced concrete.
Okay.
You don't have the same issues with termites eating the structural frame like you do in California, but you have different beasts.
Like what? What are they looking for?
Concrete curing issues. If concrete isn't cured properly, if it's not kept wet while it hardens, it can develop microcracks that compromise its strength over time. You have issues with the quality of plastering, with waterproofing in a tropical monsoon climate.
So the methodology changes completely?
Completely. They use primarily non-destructive testing, things like rebound hammers that measure surface hardness or ultrasonic pulse velocity tests to find voids in the concrete. Although the source mentions that in some cases, based on customer requirements, they will perform core cutting.
Core cutting? That sounds intense. What is that?
It is. It involves drilling a literal cylinder, a core of concrete, out of a column or a slab to test its compressive strength in a lab.
Wow.
That is very, very different from a U.S. inspector walking around with a flashlight and a screwdriver.
Yeah, if a U.S. inspector started drilling holes in the wall of a suburban house, the seller would call the police.
Exactly. It just shows how the local construction methods dictate the inspection protocols.
So we've covered the who and the where. Let's look at the what. Because I looked at the types of inspections section of the notes, and it's like a menu at a restaurant. There isn't just one burger. There are 10 different kinds of burgers, depending on what you're hungry for.
That is a good analogy. The standard burger is your transactional home buyer's inspection. That is what 90% of our listeners are familiar with. You make an offer, you inspect the house, you negotiate repairs. Simple.
But then you have the pre-listing inspection. That's for the seller, right?
Yes, and honestly, this is a strategic move that more sellers should consider using. The seller hires the inspector before putting the house on the market.
Why spend the money, though? Why not just wait for the buyer to find the problems?
Because surprise is the enemy of a deal. Imagine you're selling. The buyer's inspection finds a major issue, like a bad roof, in the middle of negotiations.
The buyer panics.
They panic. They will ask for a massive price reduction,
Right.
way more than the roof actually costs, or they'll walk away. If the seller finds it first, they can fix it on their own terms with a roofer they choose. Or they can price the house accordingly and disclose it up front.
The house is priced to reflect the need for a new roof.
Exactly. It removes the leverage from the buyer. It controls the narrative.
Smart. Very smart.
Yeah.
Then there's the pre-delivery inspection. This is specific to new builds.
Yes. Or the PDI.
Now, this is one where I think people get complacent. They think it's a brand new house, no one has ever lived in it, everything must be perfect.
That is the new car smell fallacy. Do not assume that because a house is new, it is perfect. In fact, new builds often have what we call teething issues.
Like what? What kind of mistakes are we talking about?
Oh, all sorts. I've seen new builds where the vents for the bathroom fans were never connected to the roof. They were just venting moist air directly into the brand new attic, which is a recipe for mold. I've seen insulation missing in entire sections of the wall. I've seen plumbing that leaked the first time the water was turned on. I've seen windows installed backwards.
Backwards.
Yep.
Yeah.
The weep holes that are supposed to let water out were on the inside.
Oh my God. So the pre-delivery inspection is your chance to catch the builder's mistakes before you sign off and give them that final check.
Yes. And typically, the builder is obligated to fix them under warranty. But you have to find them first and create a formal punch list.
Then we get into the really heavy stuff. The source mentions disaster inspection. This isn't about buying. This is about survival.
This is a grim but necessary part of the industry. This is post-event. Tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, wildfires. Inspectors go into homes, often working for FEMA or insurance companies, to assess damage.
I can't imagine what that job is like, walking into a house that's been flooded with 3 feet of mud.
It's not about checking if the outlets are grounded. It's about, is the structure compromised? Is it safe to enter? What is the dollar value of the loss? It is high-stress, emotional work, assessing habitability.
And then there's Section 8 inspection. This is specific to the U.S., right?
Yes. Section 8 is a housing subsidy program. The government pays a portion of the rent for low-income families directly to the landlord. But before they pay, they need to ensure the property is fit for habitation.
So they are checking against a specific standard.
Yes, HUD's Housing Quality Standards, or HQS. They are looking for the basics of human decency and safety. Is there heat? Is there hot and cold running water? Are there rodent infestations? Is there peeling lead paint? Are the windows broken?
So it's less about, is this a good investment, and more about, is this safe for a human to live in?
Exactly. It establishes a baseline floor for housing quality for subsidized housing.
Now, here's one I had never heard of. Immigration reports in the UK. Why on earth does a visa applicant need a home inspection?
This fascinated me too. It connects back to public health laws from decades ago. If you are living in the UK and you want to bring a spouse or dependent over on a visa, the UK Visa and Immigration Authority, the UKVI, needs to verify your living situation.
They want to make sure you aren't stuffing 10 people into a one-bedroom flat.
Precisely. They require a property inspection report to ensure the home will not become legally overcrowded under the Housing Act of 1985. They calculate room sizes and the number of permitted occupants.
So the inspector is basically certifying, yes, there is enough room for this new person to live here safely and legally.
Yes. It's fascinating how home inspection intersects with immigration policy. It shows that inspection is about more than real estate. It is about standards of living and public health.
Okay, let's talk about the specialized inspections, the add-ons, the ones that go deeper than the standard visual check. I keep hearing about 4-point inspections. What are the 4 points?
This is a term you will hear constantly if you are buying an older home, especially in Florida or other coastal states. Insurance companies drive this. They want to know about the 4 big liability risks.
Which are?
1, the roof. 2, the HVAC, system heating and air conditioning. 3, the electrical system. And 4, the plumbing.
Why just those 4? Why don't they care about the foundation, for instance?
Because those are the 4 things that generate claims. A leaky roof causes massive water damage. Old plumbing bursts and floods the house. Bad wiring causes fires. An old HVAC system can leak and cause damage.
So it's all about risk for the insurer.
All about their risk. Insurance companies don't care if the foundation has a crack that might cause the house to settle in 20 years. They care if the house is going to burn down tomorrow.
And what are they looking for specifically in those areas?
For the roof, they want to know the age and condition. For plumbing, they're checking for old galvanized pipes or active leaks. And for electrical, they are looking for specific things like knob and tube wiring or aluminum wiring.
These are old school wiring methods.
Yes, technologies from the past that are known fire hazards. If a 4-point inspection finds those, the insurance company might say, we won't insure you until you rewire the house.
Which is a massive, unexpected expense. Good to know. Now, let's talk about structural inspection. This brings us back to that legal distinction we touched on earlier regarding who can say what.
This is a crucial boundary line. A general home inspector can look at a wooden beam in the basement and say, that beam is sagging. It has a crack running horizontally along the grain. That is an observation of condition.
Right. I see a crack, it is this big, and it is here.
Correct. But in many places, like New York, for example, a general inspector cannot legally give a professional opinion on structural sufficiency.
So they can't say, that beam is sagging and the house is going to collapse.
Exactly. They cannot calculate the load. They cannot say, this beam is overloaded and structurally unsound. Only a licensed professional engineer, a PE, or a registered architect can render that opinion. They are the ones with the license and the insurance to do the math.
So if your inspector sees a scary crack, what do?
They put it in the report, often in big, bold letters. Structural movement and deflection observed in main support beam. Recommend further evaluation by a licensed structural engineer prior to closing.
They pass the baton.
They stay in their lane to avoid liability and, frankly, practicing engineering without a license.
And you, the buyer, have to be the one to hire that engineer and pay them to come out.
Yes. And honestly, you want them to stay in their lane. You don't want someone guessing about gravity.
That leads us perfectly into the final section. The fine print, the limitations and exclusions. Because for all this talk of forensics, there are huge blind spots in a standard inspection. And this is where I feel like buyers get the most upset later. Why didn't you find this?
Huge blind spots. And the general rule is, if it exceeds the standards of practice, it is excluded.
Let's run through the big exclusions. Trees, that big, beautiful oak tree in the front yard.
Not included. An inspector is not an arborist. They aren't trained to look at that massive oak tree overhanging the roof and tell you if it's rotting from the inside and ready to fall on your house in the next storm.
So if you're worried about the trees,
hire a certified arborist.
Goals and spas.
Usually excluded from the general inspection unless you pay extra for a specific pool inspection. A pool is a complex mechanical system. Pumps, filters, heaters, chemical balance, plus the structural shell. Some inspectors have extra certification for it, but don't assume it's included.
Although the notes mentioned that the Canadian standard, that CSA A770-16, is unique because it actually mandates swimming pool safety inspections.
It does, which is a progressive step. It focuses on safety features like fences and gates. But in the U.S., standard contracts usually exclude the pool system unless you specifically add it on.
Now, here's the one that I think is the most controversial. Thermal imaging.
Ah, the infrared debate.
I mean, the technology exists. You could buy a thermal camera that clips onto your phone. It can see heat loss. It can see cold spots from moisture behind a wall that looks perfectly dry to the naked eye. Why isn't every inspector using this on every inspection?
Many are starting to offer it as an ancillary service, but it is considered exceeding the standard scope. And here's the debate. Liability.
How does seeing more create liability? Shouldn't it reduce liability?
You'd think so. But imagine you are an inspector. You use a thermal camera on the living room and find nothing. Great. But you forget to scan the small closet under the stairs. 6 months later, a pipe bursts in that closet wall.
Right.
The buyer sues you saying, you had the camera, you were looking for leaks, why didn't you find it? The argument becomes that by using the advanced tool, you set a higher standard for yourself.
If you use it, you better be perfect with it.
Exactly. Once you start looking inside the walls, you open a Pandora's box of expectations. Many inspectors argue that unless they are charging for a full thermal audit and doing it methodically room by room, it's safer for them to stick to the visual standard.
I can't see behind walls, so don't blame me for what's behind wall.
Precisely. And that brings us to the hidden stuff. The biggest nightmare for buyers, the underground sewer line.
Oh, God. I have a friend who bought a house.
Mm-hmm.
Charming 1920s bungalow.
Yeah.
Week 1, they flush the toilet and sewage backs up into the bathtub.
The classic horror story.
It turned out that tree roots had grown completely through the old clay pipes in the front yard. It cost them $10,000 to dig up the yard and replace the line. They were furious at the inspector. Why didn't you check the sewer?
And the inspector's defense was likely valid and written right in his contract. I inspected the plumbing inside the house. The fixtures drained when I tested them. The sewer line is buried 6 feet underground. I cannot see through dirt.
So how do you avoid that? How do you check for that?
You hire a specialist to do a sewer scope. They run a camera snake down the line all the way to the street. It costs maybe $200, $300 extra.
And they can see the cracks, the roots, the blockages.
They give you a video of the whole trip. If you're buying an old house with mature trees in the yard, it is the best money you will ever spend. But a standard home inspector does not do it as part of the base package. It's an ancillary inspection.
That is a pro tip right there. Always get the sewer scope on an old house.
Always. And finally, we have to address the no guarantee.
The disclaimer at the bottom of the report, usually in all caps, this report is not a warranty.
It is the harshest reality. The inspector is not an insurer. If they miss something that was visible and that they should have seen, you might have a claim against their errors and omissions insurance.
But those policies often limit the payout to just the cost of the inspection itself.
Often, yes. And if something simply breaks the day after you move in, the water heater that worked perfectly on inspection day just gives up the ghost. That is the joy of homeownership. You own the house and you own its problems.
Man, we have covered a lot of ground. We traveled from the specific anti-corruption laws of Massachusetts to the concrete high-rises of Mumbai. We looked at the bureaucratic mess of Ontario licensing and the very practical reason why insurance companies hate knob and tube wiring.
It is a massive landscape, and it's a lot more complex than just kicking the tires.
If I have to summarize this for the listener who is maybe driving to an open house right now, what's the big takeaway?
The key takeaway is that a home inspection is a tool for informed decision-making, not a crystal ball, and not a warranty. It is a visual snapshot in time. It reduces risk significantly, but it does not eliminate it.
And it's not a pass-fail exam, right? I think people wait for the inspector to say the house passed.
Exactly. The house doesn't pass or fail. The house just is. The inspection tells you the condition. You decide if it passes or fails based on your budget, your skills, and your risk tolerance.
Right.
A house with a bad roof might be a fail for a first-time buyer with no savings, but it might be a pass for a contractor who knows he can replace it himself and wants to fix it.
Jim, it's becoming cheaper. Everyone has a smartphone. We talked about AI. How long until the definition of non-invasive changes?
That is the big question, isn't it? As technology evolves, will the legal standard of care shift? If an inspector could have seen the leak with a $200 attachment on their phone, will the courts eventually say they should have? Will non-invasive come to mean anything short of a sledgehammer?
And in markets like India, where the builder has held the power for so long, will the consumer, armed with more information and more legal rights, eventually force a fundamental shift in transparency?
I believe so. Information is power. The more buyers know, the less they will fear, and the more they will demand. The days of buying a multi-million rupee flat on vibes alone are numbered.
Well, next time you walk into an open house, maybe don't just look at the granite countertops and the backsplash. Look at the corners of the ceiling. Look at the grating outside. And remember, what you see is only half the story.
Indeed. Look closer.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.